the second talk. My talk had a very long and complicated title, and after Stefan's talk I decided to rename it to something more familiar. My hero's journey with Vue CLI 3 and the obstacles and trials and dragons I've encountered. Okay, so who am I? I'm Manuel. I'm a lead developer here right at CLI, and sometimes I also teach in Hamburg. I do have a blog, and if you want, you can follow me on Twitter. So, just so we're all on the same page, who knows what's Vue? Okay, that's nice. It's the small description they've put on their website. Vue is a progressive framework for building user interfaces. They like the term progressive. I think it's their fancy term for what Stefan explained in his talk, this incremental adoption. You had the fancy term. So they should rename the progressive thing to incremental adoption. Yeah. And the Vue CLI is the command line tooling that's provided for Vue development. There was a Vue CLI 2, but it did not really reflect the idea of a progressive framework where you have the small things that you can take bit by bit. It's generated a huge build file, and you had to read all of that first. And so they tried to change that with the new CLI. Okay, so this will be very hands-on. First thing you have to do is get rid of your old CLI. If you don't do that, you get all kinds of NPM errors, which I did, of course. So then you have to install it, and everything is now under the add Vue prefix. Everything that has to do with the CLI 3. And when you have installed it globally, you can check it. You should have the new version. Okay, I think there's already a 0.5 that was released today, so I'm outdated. Now, the Vue CLI does provide you with a few very helpful things. One of them is instant prototyping, which they've solved really nicely, because you can now just write an app.vue file or main.js or index.js, it doesn't matter. It will try a few names to find the one that matches, and immediately serve that with the CLI. So you don't need any scaffolding, any config. You can just create your template, put in a file, and serve it. You do need a second global dependency though, which is the CLI service that does all the heavy lifting. I can try that just to show you. Where am I? Okay, nice. Just write some, oh no. Write some template, call it something. And now if I run Vue serve, it will take the app.vue that's already in the folder, but you can, of course, just provide the entry file that you have, and it will start the development server with webpack hot reloading, and all of the setup is the same as if you would scaffold a real project. So that's really easy. Yeah. And the nice thing is, if you just want to prototype quickly, you can take this and do everything that you would do in a bigger project. You can add a package.json file, install a few local dependencies, you can config Babel, PostGIS, everything you want to do. So if you want, you can also build a few sync file components, and then you have a really nice prototype with just 2 files. And you can also build that prototype. So if you just use the global Vue command, Vue build, it will provide you with a dist folder with index, HTML, and the assets. So that's pretty easy. But of course, after some prototyping, you want to get a real project, and that's where it now gets interesting. The Vue CLI has a Vue create command, which is very self-explanatory. You specify your name, and it asks you a few questions. Do you want to have ES linked? If so, do you want standard or Airbnb config? All things that Vue CLI 2 also asked you. But there are some new things. There's now a UI for the CLI, which is really fancy. And you can still use the templates from the old CLI if you have to. So I will just quickly show you the view grid. Let's call it StahlstadtJS. And it will ask you a lot of things. I don't want to make any settings, and yeah, then it works. Let's just have that run. Oh. No, wait. Let's do it like this. So I did try that, but maybe it works at the same time. It's called View CLI. Now with the new View CLI, you can do everything you did in a CLI, not in a CLI, but in a user interface, which is the biggest change. It's in German now, unfortunately. And so, what you can see here, it will first open up the index, and you will have all your local Vue projects in there. And you can scaffold new projects or import existing ones. And if you create a project in the UI, it will ask you the same questions. So that's now done. Oh. And I will show you the scripts that are already in the package.json file later. And you have your very small Vue app. You can do the same in the UI. I won't show you now because it's the same but with more colors. And it does use the same port by default. So you can, of course, configure that. And the project is now not in here, but you can import it. And it will give you a small icon so you know which ones. Where am I now? And it will then list all of the plugins that you've installed and all of the dependencies in the package.json, and it will also tell you if something's outdated and you can update it. It will even suggest plugins that you could add to your Vue project. So that's really nice. What it also does is show you the scripts that are in your package.json, and these, and you can run them in the UI. Which then starts the CLI, of course. Where is it? Yeah, so you then get your Webpack output. What it also does is give you this super fancy UI where it shows you your package size and all of those things in HTML instead of the CLI and all the files that it has generated. So all of that is visual fluff on top of the CLI, but it's pretty nice. I'd never use it, but you can, of course, if you like. Yeah. So, yeah. Now, the projects that the old Vue CLI created had a huge build config files that you had to look through to understand what it does. They've now changed it to plugins. So the project that the CLI creates is very small, and everything is now put into plugins that hide away all the things that it does. So it has a small API surface now. The CLI service is always there. That's the binary file that does the building and the serving. And then there's plugins for all different things. Yeah. So I will show you the project that I've created right now. What was it called? Temp, Start. Okay. So, this work on it? Oh, yeah, nice. So as you can see, the project that was created has much fewer files than in the old CLI. You just have a public, a source folder, a package.js, Git node readme, and a Babel config. And the package.json is also very small. There are the plugins that are added based on your answers to the prompts. And there are these three basic scripts. All of them use the Vue CLI service. There's no more long commands that you have to remember, settings you have to take. This does basically everything for you. And by default, it also puts the ESLint config, post-CSS config in the package.json, so there are less files, but you can change that. Okay, so my project now has a Babel ESLint with default configuration, and then there are of course a few plugins that you can add. There are about 8 or 9 official plugins now. One of them is a PWA plugin, and you can add plugins just by typing Vue add. And you can then give it a shorthand, because the plugin is actually called add Vue CLI plugin PWA, but it will expand that if you just write Vue PWA. And all of the plugins have the same prefix, so all of them start with CLI plugin. If you want to write your own third-party plugin, you have to call it Vue CLI plugin something, so the registry can find it. Yeah, so just let's do that. Not in the UI. This will download the plugin, add it to the package.json file, and each plugin has a generator and a prompt part. These are both optional. Yeah, but you need the generator. The generator can add new files, modify existing ones, but each plugin may also ask you a few other questions. So if you did not add the ESLint plugin at the start and would add it later, it would ask you, yeah, what config should I load, and all of these questions. Yeah. So you then have a summary of what it did. It added a few files. And yeah, so it added the register service worker package, the plugin, of course, updated the log file, and it added this import into the main.js. So really neat. And in public, there are a lot of icons now, which of course have to replace. And it will give you a basic manifest.json. I'll get to the PWA plugin later again. So that's all about plugins. What the CLI also has is presets. So if you scaffold a lot of projects, you can save the answers to the prompts if you want. So I always use Babel and ESLint Airbnb config, so you can just save it to a preset. You can also save different presets if you want. And these are just JSON files. You can then use them with the preset option. You can use presets that you have on your machine. You can use repositories. So if you're working on a team, everyone can scaffold the same type of project. Or you can use any JSON file that lies somewhere on your desktop. The Vue CLI will write a .vuerc in your home directory where the presets are stored. So I can go there and show you mine. It's not so interesting. Yeah. So there is just some presets, and that of course can be more. And I want Vuex and the router here. Okay. And if you're wondering, the Taobao registry is a Chinese NPM mirror, because many of the Vue developers are Chinese and they want to get their packages faster. If you want to get your packages slower, set this to true, and the CLI will go all the way through China and back again, yeah, but still work. Yeah, all right. So the CLI service, which is the thing that does all the heavy lifting, it does have a really nice help output in the terminal in the CLI. There's a serve, a build, a inspect, a lint, and all of them have a few options, like what port do I want to serve and all of these things. And the build has a few other nice things that I will talk about later. But if you want to check them out, just use the help command. Okay. I won't go into detail about that, but if you want, that's just a quick reference where to put your config files. You can put everything in package.json or in the files that you know from the tools already. And if it's not part of a plugin, everything goes in a view.config.js. This is a file that you have to create in your project. It's not there by default. If you don't want to change anything from the default config, you can just leave it. But if you want, you can add the config file. So, next. Browser compatibility is pre-configured for you. You can specify browser list, and it will run auto prefixer on the styles, and it will also add polyfills depending on the process that you've specified for JavaScript for your 6 features or something like that. And there's also a thing that they call modern mode, which is pretty interesting. You can run the modern mode with --modern, and what this does is build all your JavaScript files twice. Once with polyfills for ES6 features and once without. So this is the default project that I've just created, just a single file, and it even does make a difference here. So the modern version has 16 of 17K less. Yeah, so now you have these 2 scripts, what to do with them. The Vue CLI will add them to your index.html as ES modules. So if your browser supports ES modules, it will load the new files with less code. And if it doesn't, it will load the old scripts. There's also a fallback, which I deleted for the slides for Safari 10 or something, which will then strip away the no module, so the browser loads this stupid file. And it will also add preload links for the JavaScript files. So that's pretty nice. Okay. I won't go into detail with that because the HTML Webpack plugin basically does everything, but that's still the same as it was in the Vue CLI 2. It adds also preloads and prefetch hints, and if you want, or if you have a multi-page application, you can specify your entry files in the Vue config.js. So, then assets are also pre-configured for you, and as I've already shown you, there's a public folder. You put your file in a public folder, you can reference it, and it will be loaded. Yeah, that's easy, but if you use relative imports to your files, they will go through Webpack and through the file URL loader. So if those assets are images and they are less than 4 KB, they are inlined. Yeah. The docs say assets, but it doesn't work for SVGs, so I crossed it out. And I show you what you have to do to make it work with SVGs as well, because apparently SVGs are not images. And it will add the hash of the file content for cache busting, which is nice. So if that were PNG, it would just become logo some hash PNG. And if you have an image that is less than 4 KB, like some icon or so, it will inline it as a base 64 thing, which is nice. Yeah, okay. So working with CSS is also the same as in the old CLI. Everything is pre-configured. You just have to add the Webpack loaders for the preprocessor that you want to use. So I like Sass, so I have to install Sass loader. If you like Stylus, install a Stylus loader. You can also config post-CSS in the view.config.js file. And if you like CSS modules, you can use CSS module. Okay, so of course, if you scaffold a project, at some point you want to change something in the config, and this is where you have to get into Webpack, and there are 2 ways to do that. So in the view config.js, which is also just a big JavaScript object, you can either configure the configure webpack option or the chain webpack, and they do different things. So the easiest is configure webpack and then add your webpack config. This will be merged with webpack merge, so everything that you've written will override what has been there before. So you can just add plugins, loaders, everything you want. That's easy. You can return an object, which will be merged, or you can return a function and directly modify the config if you want. If you use a function, of course, you can then also test for environment variables and everything like. What I didn't know is the webpack chain plugin, which is a tool to go into your webpack config, tear it apart, change options, and then give it back again. So you can just tap into plugins or loaders and change options of them. You can remove things, you can change tests, like what files should go through that loader. Yeah, it's a bit complicated to use. There's a really long README file, but yeah, I'm not too sure yet if I like it or not. CLI uses this under the hood, so this is where you can get really deep into it. And now, when you have this API layer that sits on top of Webpack and all those things, you might want to know what is actually happening, and there's a view inspect for that. View inspect will just return you the Webpack config that it generates. So, if we give you this big JSON file with all the loaders and plugins that are configured. This, of course, can get very long, but then you really know what the CLI does. You can also narrow this search down. You can list all the plugins that you have, and then inspect the plugins. So, let's do the loaders examples. Do inspect rules. This will give you all the rules, and if you want to inspect a specific rule, write it like this, and it will just give you that webpack configuration part. Okay, so, and if for some reason your webpack config has to go into another CLI tool, you can do that as well. There's a 7-line JavaScript file for that, which will just do the view inspect stuff for you, which you can add to your other command line tools. Okay, so yeah, I've done it already. And one of the last things I want to talk about, you can now add .env files. Doesn't know what a .env file is. It's just a file of environment variables. Uppercase variable equals some value. And you can specify env files now for different modes. You can even specify local env files that then are ignored by Git if you have some sensitive information in there. And yeah, the more specific your env file is, the more stuff it overwrites, of course. And there are different modes that are used by the CLI by default. So serve uses development env files, and production build uses production env files. But you can also specify your own. And if you have some values that start with view underscore app, it will print them out in the generated files. So if you have some app zip grids or so, it will print them out. Everything else will just stay in your build file. Yeah, and you can use all of your env variables in the index.html if you want, or have to for base URI, for example. And now another fun thing that you can do with the CLI is you can take your view component and build it as a web component, which I find interesting. What this then does is it bundles everything together into a single file, and it also gives you a demo HTML, and then you can use your custom web component. What does that look like? You have to change the target to web component, give it a name, anything you like, and then specify some view single file component. These can also be more if you want, and you can then just import it and use it as a web component, which is nice. And this web component needs a global view, so it expects a global view that's there. So yeah, just give that. Yeah, if you want, I have a small example PWA. Doesn't do a lot of things. You can check out the code and see how the view CLI 3 is built, is configured. I will show you a few details, but you can check it out if you want more details. And I saved the view CLI 2 config if you want to see the changes. So just a few things that if you then have a bigger project than just a scaffolded base project. I like to have all my configs in single files. So there's an ESLint config and all of this, but it's just my preference. You can, of course, then add more scripts and everything you like. Yeah, I didn't use any more CLI plugins except the PWA plugin. And if you use the PWA plugin, you can also configure it in the view.config.js. And what does this look like? So every plugin, of course, has a README file on the GitHub page. And you can specify icon paths and workbook options, everything you want. And it will pass a lot of these options through to workbooks. So that's plugin configuration. You can do that as well in the view config file. Here's an example for the webpack configuration. So what I have is I've added 2 plugins to the default config, just another copy plugin, so that my manifest is also available as a .NET manifest, depending on the service. And there's also a pre-render SPA plugin. If you don't know it, the pre-render SPA plugin takes your app and a few routes that you specify and will render them in a headless browser. So you can put them also on your server, and Googlebot is very happy with pre-rendered files, and you have some SEO benefits. So yeah, you just specify the plugins. That's really easy, and then do everything you would in your webpack config. Then there's the chain webpack, where you can dive into the config. So what I did there, if you remember, I talked about SVGs not being images. If you inspect the default settings, you will find different rules for SVGs and for images. So SVGs run through the file loader, but images run through the URL loader and then through the file loader. And I want the same behavior for my SVGs. So I can just delete the SVG rule, then tap into the images and change the test. So it has SVGs as well, and then I get base 64 SVGs. Yeah. So that's about it. Just to wrap up, there are official plugins for all the things that you like. Everything is now based on plugins, which is nice because it's now composition over inheritance. You can just take what you need and leave what you don't need. You don't have to eject. So if there are updates to the plugins or the CLI or Vue itself, you can just update the plugin. Don't have to change your config or your build files or build steps. There's a fancy graphic user interface if you're into that. You can, of course, write your own plugins. It's pretty easy, but I didn't want to cover that as well. You can also write UI plugins if you want. There's now the instant prototyping feature, the modern flag, and you can build your Vue components as web components. Yeah, so I will put the slides up later. There's of course a official guide, if config reference. There's also a plugin development guide. You can just basically copy paste the plugin stuff and then write what you want. Yeah, so and that's a list of the official plugins that already exist. So there are things for Babel, TypeScript, for Jest, Mocha, Cypress, and Nightwatch. If you think there's something missing, go write the plugin. Yeah, so, and last but not least, we don't only host events with Lebergas. We're also always actively looking for web developers. So if you're into all of this JavaScript stuff and also a bit of PHP stuff,